Oh, hi there. This is Tune Into Gaming. I'm North Kozar.
And I'm Quactical.
So this week we've got a bundle of stuff to talk about. We're going to go over some of the games that we're playing or we've been playing. Large bundle. The epic bundle. The humble bundle. We're going to talk
Epically humble bundle.
about some music. We're going to talk about some of the tripping of the nostalgia. And for our main segment, we're going to be talking about roguelikes and dungeon crawlers and kind of delve into some of that. But before we get into any of that, let's just kind of do a little catch-up thing. What have you been up to the last 2 weeks, good sir?
Oh, I've been mostly just busy, working a lot, doing a bit of music, which has been good.
That's good.
Other than that, yeah, not much. The busyness has really been hitting me.
Yeah, I feel you on the busy thing. It's been a bit of a week for me, but I mean, here we are. Get to talk about some games and talk about some music, which I like that we're going to talk about some music now. Not that we haven't talked about music in the past episodes, but I just mean like more intentionally as opposed to a byproduct of the mystery sound segment, I suppose.
Yeah, I definitely think we're getting into a part of the podcast where it's going to become a little bit more open-ended. That's going to be a good thing. I'm definitely very excited for that. I'm excited to talk about the dungeon crawlers and the roguelikes, as well as talk about some music. So
yeah, definitely. So let's start with what have you been playing?
Well, so actually, it was funny. I was listening to Two on the Vine, and they were talking about Darkest Dungeon, which reminded me of a game that I loved when I was much younger, and we played a bit, Demise.
Yeah.
But then, as well, it's very similar to another game more recently called Legend of Grimrock. Now, if you're not familiar with any of these games, they're dungeon crawlers. Legend of Grimrock starts you off. You're a party of four criminals, basically, and you go to the top of this mountain, Grimrock, and you're shoved into this pit, and at the top of the mountain, and you are told that if you make your way all the way down to the bottom of the mountain, you are absolved of your crimes. But in the dungeon is tons of monsters and traps and all sorts of death. So
of course, couldn't be easy.
So the game is then about, taking that party of four and, exploring the dungeon, becoming stronger, learning how to survive in the really harsh landscape.
Nice. So gameplay wise, I played Demise back in the day, but what kind of could you describe a little bit of what the gameplay is like of like Demise and Legend of Grimrock? Because it's a little different in terms of, I guess, most dungeon crawlers, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. So it's very tile based. We've been playing a lot of tile based games recently. So there's squares of the dungeon and there are walls to the rooms, and so you move square to square in a grid. And so it's actually, there's kind of some interesting mechanics about dodging the monster's attacks and kiting them around the room, which wasn't quite there in Demise. In Demise, how it worked is once you entered a room, the monsters there would come and fight you, and then it became this sort of semi-real-time turn-based battle where your characters would swing, the enemies would swing, you would swing, but you would all swing according to your attack speeds, and that was just a stat. But yeah, it is rather different as far as the gameplay. It's very old school. It almost kind of reminds me of like an adventure game with graphics added on. Demise especially, because of the depth of the item pool for sure, and then the simplicity of the movement mechanics and the combat. It was very much, I'm going to turn left and walk forward. There's a door to your left. There's a wall in front of you. There's space to your right. What do you do? Like that kind of level of adventure game. But you put a graphical interface on top of that, and you have one of these dungeon crawlers.
So it's basically if you were to take a game of Dungeons and Dragons and add to it a first-person tile-based graphic set, sort of?
Right. And that's where a lot of RPG gaming started in a lot of ways, especially, as far as computer games. That's, the same types of people who had been playing Dungeons and Dragons there are many, many, many types of tabletop role-playing games.
Right.
Many of them were probably some of the first game developers. I don't know these people, personally, obviously, but I can only imagine.
It's actually my good cousin, my good friend, my
Yep.
good relative, Joe, the D&D player from days of
I
yesteryear.
got the connections, but I can only assume because, you know, I
mean,
have loved board games and video games and tabletop role-playing games and role-playing games in general, and just games of all sorts for all of my life. So I can only imagine that other people who have similar interests also have similar interests.
That's usually how similar interests work. I think that's
like
actually
a fair assumption.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of interesting though, because I know that there is a lot of crossover between like people who play a lot of tabletop or like board games and people who enjoy video games. But I think there's also kind of a bit of a division. Like I also know some people who could care less about video games, but are like, yes, I must play, whatever, whether D&D or Warhammer. That's the one with all the figures and stuff, right? Yeah. Which I've seen like some of the setups that people have for Warhammer, and I'm just like blown away at how epic and huge it is. And it definitely seems like it would be a lot of fun, but it's kind of like,
it's also really expensive.
I feel like not only do things like the tabletop or card games get really expensive, but it's just like you really have to dedicate a lot of time into it in terms of learning it and developing strategies and then like going and playing it. But I think it's really awesome how the communities form around that and stuff. I just think that it's easier for me to like play a video game because then I don't have to, one, buy things, and two, honestly set it all up and pick it all up afterwards. But I mean, I kind of did that with Legos when I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extension of that for sure.
Yeah. But anyway, the divergence is real. But yeah, that's cool about Legend of Grimrock. I know with Demise, I don't want to step on the toes too much of Demise because we may or may not be discussing it later. But Demise was pretty text heavy, like if I'm remembering correctly, or am I remembering incorrectly?
Well, I mean, I think it's fine. We might as well just talk about it now because I think it's related.
All right.
So yeah, it definitely had a lot of text, and that was where a lot of the lore and the flavor came in. It wasn't as much, fancy cinematics in your face giving you the storyline. And a lot of these dungeon crawl type games, especially early on, had this more like investigatory lore element to them. As you explored the world, you came upon more scrolls and you encountered more types of monsters. You mapped out the dungeon. One feature that Legend of Grimrock and Demise both share is that you start off with an empty map, basically. You know nothing about the terrain. But as you explore these rooms and navigate the passageways and kill monsters, you gradually start to map out the various floors of the dungeon. And you definitely get this feeling of going deeper and deeper and deeper. And, each time you descend on stairs to a new level, there's definitely this feeling of excitement. You're like, oh, wow, I haven't been to this floor before. I don't know what's here. I'm going to find something like nasty and scary, and it's going to kill me in some interesting ways until I learn how to deal with it.
Right.
And this definitely ties into, what's going to be our main topic, which is dungeon crawlers and roguelikes. But the exploration element of it is really strong for me. And that's what really drew me to Demise. And Legend of Grimrock definitely has that element as well. I haven't gotten into it quite as much yet. And I think that's because there isn't as much of the persistent town element, whereas Demise had that home base. And I liked that about Demise. Demise had a town and a store and various shops and things that as you went further into the dungeon and, encountered more monsters and items, you changed how the town was. Not really visually, but in terms of the items that were there. And you sort of advanced the pool of overall knowledge of your game. And actually, it ended up becoming multiplayer as well. So you had this really cool experience of a multiplayer server where you could have like the progression of the overall server, the overall game.
Oh,
Whereas
yeah.
in single player, it was just you could have many parties of characters. And so if one of your parties went down into the dungeon and died, you could send a rescue party after them. Or maybe some of your characters are still alive down there. And because you could like switch off of them.
Right.
One element that Demise had, which I'm not actually quite sure how it works in Legend of Grimrock yet, but as you clear rooms in the dungeon, after about 10 to 15 minutes, the monsters respawn. So you have like a limited amount area that you can clear out. But then as you move around, in rooms that you're not in, monsters will spawn behind you. So you can get fairly deep, and then if you find yourself becoming, if you're almost dead, you're going to have to fight your way out anyway.
So now, again, this is sort of me refreshing my memory on Demise, and also curious because I haven't played Legend of Grimrock. I've only seen some videos. With Demise, there was the guild system where you kind of like you had like a class based on what guilds you were in. How does that play out in Legend of Grimrock, or is it different?
I think, yeah, it's Legend of Grimrock. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a direct like.
It's not a descendant, or
it's not a descendant. That's the word I'm looking for. Predecessor would be Demise in this case. It doesn't share a lot of those kinds of elements of Demise.
Oh, okay. It's just style, like gameplay wise and whatnot.
Yeah,
similar.
Stylistically, it looks very similar, and it plays very similar. But like the characters each just have a class, and they advance in that class.
Okay.
The spells are cast. There's a little like rune page that comes up, and you have to click the different runes, and then you press the spell button, and so you like learn different combinations as you explore the dungeon. So that's actually kind of cool.
That's neat.
I really liked that. But then certain spells are locked until you get enough levels in the certain types of magic, and I think there's 3. It's like fire, ice, and earth magic, and then there's spellcraft, which is your mana. Each of the characters has like a skill page with like 8 skills on it, and you get like 4 skill points per level to distribute amongst the skills. The skills also increase your base attributes, and your base attributes control like your damage and your health and your speed and that kind of stuff. I don't remember what they're all called off the top of my head, but it's kind of standard in that sense.
I just remember in Demise that leveling up attributes was a painstaking process because you had to find like the tombs and tomes, like read them. Tomes. Yeah, tombs.
Well, tomes in tombs.
Tomes and tombs. The book that allows you to gain insight into one's own being. But I remember you just had like stack constitution to get enough health to actually survive. But my mind is brimming with questions just because now I'm really curious, remembering all about Demise and how much we got really like into it a lot. And it was definitely a repetitive game because the dungeon in Demise was static, like it didn't ever like it was the same one. Every character you went in, it was the same. But I did really like having that town aspect where you go in the dungeon and you get far and you explore. Oh, well, here's this cool thing. Here's this other cool thing. Okay, time to go back to town, sell my stuff. Having that kind of home base is really neat. And I'm interested that so Legend of Grimrock doesn't have that because it's much more linear. You're trying to, I presume, get down the mountain to absolve yourself of these crimes that you may or may not have committed. So it's interesting, just the direction that the incentive behind doing the things you're doing. With Demise, it was very much like, I'm a dungeon explorer. I'm going to explore this thing, level up, fight monsters, find cool treasure, and be the best. Whereas Legend of Grimrock, it sounds maybe it's a bit more like kind of story driven, and that could be really interesting as you go down the mountain, you learn more about the story by finding like scrolls or whatever. I don't know again how that story.
I'm not super far into it, so I can't really speak to those elements yet. Demise definitely was a very gradual story experience. It wasn't really about that. It was about the exploration. Yeah.
So it was with each character, you had to remap everything, right? Or with each party?
I think
did the map
so.
Persist?
No,
I feel like
the map was persistent for your game. So each party shared the map between all the other parties in single player, at least.
Did we ever try the multiplayer?
No, we didn't, because we only ever had it on one computer.
Yeah, because I had a Mac Mini back then, and I don't think it was actually. I bet you that I remember I emailed the developer and was like, hey, thinking about making a Mac version of this game anytime soon?
And he was like, no.
Yeah, he's like, no, not so much, but thanks for your interest, bud.
Yeah. Demise definitely had a lot of interesting kind of complex elements to the game design. Death was very much a temporary thing, but you had the possibility of losing stats when you got resurrected. So one of the game mechanics was that when your characters died, you had to send a rescue party to recover their bodies. Their bodies didn't just magically teleport back to town. They were dead in a room somewhere, and probably whatever killed them is like standing over their corpse. and you have to kill that monster.
Oh, the basilisks.
Yeah,
getting stoned by them. That was the thing that like
Getting
you'd go in, you'd go in a room and then just your
One of your
entire
guys
party
is dead.
It's because you can't. What happens is when you are petrified and turned to stone, the game it progresses in turns. But when you're petrified and you can't make any moves, you can't do any actions. So you just stand there and just it's like monster attack, monster attack, monster attack, dead, because the game doesn't give you any options to do anything because you can't do anything because you're stone. And it just was, oh man, that was
it's
rough.
definitely very punishing. And thinking about it made me think of roguelikes and all the modern games that we have now. So it's definitely, for me, has a lot of nostalgia to it. So I feel like we're just doing the nostalgia trip at the start of this, which is fine.
I think we just kind of combined the what are we playing on nostalgia trip, and that's cool with me.
Yeah.
I now thinking about it more and thinking about sort of our interest in roguelike kind of games, Demise really, it makes sense. It makes sense looking back how we were so into this game that was just very mysterious. And like, I don't remember how many floors there were, but I remember we maybe made it down to floor 4 barely. Like we touched ground on floor 4, maybe didn't explore a whole lot.
Yeah, and we played a lot. I think there are like 40 floors just to like depress the hell out of you.
Oh man, that's insane.
Yeah. So it's like, it's a game that's not really meant to be beat. And I think that's something that's really fascinating to me. But like, it really is about the experience. And I think in a lot of ways, it probably wouldn't hold up that well.
Yeah.
But
especially with modern gaming, like you kind of need to have some sort of like objective that you're completing. I don't really know. Was there actually an end to the game? Was there like a final boss? Okay.
Yes. I just know that from being on the forums.
Gotcha. Yeah, it definitely did have a cult following, huh?
Oh yeah, for sure. But a really small one, like in the hundreds.
Huh. That's cool.
And I think, I'm not sure if we were talking about this on the last episode, but we definitely got into Demise through that like bundle of 10,000 games CD that I had.
Really? It was on
Yes. Well, there was a demo for it that was actually called Mordor.
That's right.
Which I tried to play. I think we tried to like install it on another computer and it wouldn't work. So I ended up like researching it, finding out that Demise existed, which was like the newer version that had a more graphical interface.
Yeah.
But I had played a lot of, I think Mordor 2 it was called.
That's
and we both had done a lot of that as well. So it,
right. I forgot about that.
We had a history of playing dungeon crawling kind of games.
We definitely have a history of that 10,000 game CD or whatever. Man, I wish we could find that. I just want to uncover it and just see what magical wonders and atrocities await in it.
I mean, probably most of the things wouldn't install.
I don't know. I mean, if you can, run it in a sandbox in an emulator or something, you might be able to make it work.
Yeah.
Just
who knows?
Boot up some DOS emulator. Oh man. Do you have no idea where that is, do you?
No, I think it's probably gone at this point.
Yeah. That's a bummer.
I know the computer that it was on, because I think what I did is I just copied all the files off the CD.
Yeah.
Because that just made things easier, so I didn't have to put the CD in every time. Because that's all it was. It was really like, it was just a CD with a bunch of like old DOS games, and I played it on I think a Windows 95 computer. Yep, this is like super nostalgia trip, but that's what it's for, right?
Yeah. Oh no. Now I'm starting to think about it. Now I'm thinking about Myst.
Oh yeah, that definitely has a cult following.
It's still a thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I haven't played it in years.
Yeah, talking about just games that are immersive and explorative and just mysterious. There is such a strong sense of mystery in Demise and like games like Myst and things where it's just that's really the intrigue, and that's kind of what draws you in. Actually, so what I've been playing is not just kind of jump over. I started playing this game Don't Starve, which has been around for a while, and I'm just playing the base version of it. Yeah, and when I first got it, probably through a humble bundle or something, I was sort of turned off from it because of the graphics. I was like, how does this work? This is like 3D on with 2D graphics. I don't know. It looks kind of funky. And so I didn't play it, which is funny because I'm very much someone who's like, ooh, who cares about graphics? It's the gameplay that matters. Yeah. And tell you what, going into a game blind, a game like that, especially not having like any idea as to what is what necessarily and how things work, it's that sense of mystery is such a strong, compelling force to keep playing. Like, I want to play and I want to discover things. And, you know, I was streaming some of it this past week, and I'm very fortunate that a couple of the viewers were actually like keying me into things. They're like, oh yeah, you have to put seeds in the bird trap to catch a bird. I'm like, oh, that's why no birds were landing in the bird trap. But just like, I don't know, figuring stuff out like that and that mystery is really cool.
Yeah. Demise and Grimrock, I'm not sure if Grimrock does it, but definitely in Demise, for when you encountered a new monster, you had to like identify them. You didn't know what it was off the bat, and you had to have characters with like high intelligence stats to actually be able to figure out over time what the monsters were. There were like different stages of identification to like both items and monsters.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't really remember that. Did it happen automatically?
Yeah, it happened automatically, but like a message would pop up and said like, you have identified this monster as a something. But then if you went with a party who like didn't have somebody who was good at identification, they would sometimes not even recognize monsters that another one of your parties had seen before. But I think it made it more likely or something.
I do remember that because it was the kind of thing where it would say, it's this monster. And you're like, no, it's not. Yeah. Or like the name would be wrong. And you're like, wait, how are you this dumb? Clearly it's a basilisk. You're petrified. Like, stop fooling yourself. You've been turned to stone.
So I think it was like a random roll going on behind the scenes, but it was kind of cool. There was lots of emergent and immersion, I guess, lots of immersion for me, but emergent gameplay elements like that where, you know, things just kind of happened and you had to roll with it.
Yeah. I think that part of the reason Demise wouldn't really stand up now is because of that level of investment that you had to give to it.
Yeah.
Like and in all honesty, just working and having adult responsibilities. Like when we were kids and playing Demise, it was much easier to just kind of be like, oh, well, let's just like, this is the thing that we're going to do for today or whatever. But I think that even putting in a couple hours, you know, every day as you're able to game, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, I think you have to like be really invested in it, because that was what added to the mystery, is that like I wanted to figure out like what was deeper and like what was going on in the dungeon.
So, I mean, it just, with the sort of pick up and play and set down mentality of a lot of games now, which I think is important, but I think it's more prolific. Like, games are definitely now meant to kind of be able to get into and leave more easily, at least the more mainstream venue of games. Of course, there's, you know, all sorts of MMORPGs and things of various natures that have a lot of time investment and whatnot, but it's, even with those, it's different because the driving force is progression, whereas the driving force in the game like Demise was sort of discovering the mystery. There was no like achievement or levels you got for delving deeper or finishing mapping out a floor. It was just like, I finally did it. I figured this out. It was this sense of like this intrinsic motivation to keep playing the game, to keep discovering stuff. And
I will amend that by saying that to level up in a lot of the guilds, you had to complete quests, which sometimes involved killing monsters on floors way deeper than you had ever been to before. So
okay. It did
definitely was. Down. Oh yes.
Okay.
And you could actually get pinned. Like, once you had enough experience to level up, you didn't automatically level up. You actually had to go back to the guild and like pay them money to like level you up. But then you could like get all the way up to having one experience to earn to get like 2 levels basically from the level that you were at, and then you would be pinned. Then you couldn't earn any more experience.
That's right. So like, if I do remember that now, because I had that happen a couple times where I was down too far on like the 3rd floor or the 2nd floor or whatever, and I was like, okay, I have to leave so I can go and level up, because otherwise I'm just wasting all this experience from killing monsters and stuff.
And sometimes the guild quests, you know, you had to go fetch an item, or you had to go, you know, these were fetch quests that were actually challenging and involved, because a lot of times there was like a special monster down there. And then you had to just find it. Like, you don't know where this thing is. You didn't get a waypoint.
Yeah.
But there were spells that you could like try and find like certain items down in the depths, and they could like give you an approximate location, but then the monsters would like move around a little bit, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think that so with the exploration and like delving deeper into the dungeon and kind of having that driving force, it really like makes you it makes you want to seek out more, but at the same time, like you have to kind of like get to a point where, you know, you have to grind a little bit, because when I don't remember like how much this happened. I just remember when we got to the basilisks, I got frustrated. But like,
Yeah.
to get further down, you had to really kind of grind to find the tomes of like attributes, or wasn't it? There was specific attributes, like you found a tome of Constitution or something, or were they general?
Yeah, and every item had an alignment, and you had to either realign the item, which cost gold, or
Of course.
find the tome of the correct alignment, or else it would like I think actually decrease your stat.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, right. Because you had they were like evil or neutral or good, and your characters had those alignments, right? And if it was misaligned, then it's like, well, better give this to my evil character or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you like,
Wow.
part of the strategy was to bank some items.
So it just, man,
Yeah,
that is really in depth.
that's one of the things that, like, even as I've gone to try and play the game more recently, is realizing, oh, to actually make progress, like, now that I know how to make progress, the mystery isn't there. So like the actual process of making progress is just a grind. And it's interesting that the game automatically is going to lose its allure in that sense. But for that first experience, it has that sense of wonder to it, or at least it did for me and for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good point. Sometimes going back and trying to revisit those, you know what's there. Like,
Yeah.
sure, there might be new and interesting stuff, but yeah, after you kind of have gone for too long of a span with that allure and that drawing in of the mysteriousness, it's sort of like, well, I mean, I kind of know there's going to be more monsters, there's going to be more floors. Like, I'm not super excited to have to grind a bunch to be able to get to the fifth floor. Whereas when you're in the thick of it and whatnot and kind of still going, I think that it's definitely much more drawing to keep playing the game.
Yeah, for sure. Well, shall we talk about some music?
Yeah, let's go ahead and transition from, man, I'm still blown away that I could not remember that it was Mordor 2 that led into Demise, that led into all of that from that 10,000 games disc. That's crazy. I'm sure there's other things on there that I've forgotten about. Mist wasn't from that disc, though. That was its own thing that you had, right?
Yeah, no. I actually think I had Mist before I had the 10,000 games.
Okay.
Because I had it in Homer when I lived in Homer.
Oh, okay. Cool. But yeah. Anyway, someday I'll be in a pawn shop and I'll see this disc that says 10,000 games. I'm gonna be like, I need this. I don't know what it will give me, but this is this magical treasure chest of things that just who knows. But yeah. Anyway, so let's talk about some music. So, what have you been doing music-wise lately? Well, first of all, let's just kind of introduce this. Us as music people, I think this is the first time we're sort of discussing us as music creators and whatnot. So, like, what do you do? What is your involvement with the world of music?
All right. Well, I started off being mostly into jazz when I was a teenager. I played in the high school jazz band, as well as just the band as well. As well.
All of the as wells.
But the thing that I liked doing the most was I was in a small jazz combo, which is we were about 6 people. I played flute and then alto sax after a while, and that was great. I kind of fell out of it towards the end of high school, and didn't play music that much in college. I did a little bit here and there, but then more recently, in the last few years, I've been actually working on an album. And so I've been teaching myself the piano and the guitar, and I'm going to try and get a bass and do that as well. But so the idea for the album is that I'm just going to have a video of me playing each of the parts and edit that together, and then that'll be also the tracks for each of the tunes.
Nice.
But I'm kind of at the point now where I have so many tunes that I've written that I just need to decide which ones I want to use and then put in the amount of polish to get them to the level to actually like finish it, right? And that's kind of always been the struggle for me.
I think that's the artistic struggle just in general with whatever the art is. You have so many works in progress that maybe, never see the light of day, that are in a drawer or in a folder somewhere, just lost in a miss.
But then stylistically, once I stopped playing like performance music, I definitely got into like video game music and electronic music a little bit more. Had some, found whatever like free producing programs I could early on and just, did some random stuff. Going back and listening to some of those early tracks is really fun sometimes.
Yeah.
But, over the years, kind of just been like honing my craft a little bit. So I'm excited to push that next level of effort into it. I'm not exactly sure where it's at, though, is kind of always the struggle, like you're saying. But stylistically now, I'm kind of moving more into like funk and jazz fusion, but still including some elements of like electronic, a little bit, just a flavor here and there. Maybe some like hip hop, but not quite as much of that. It's just a little bit of lots of different kind of stuff, but
mostly funk for now.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that's
you would say
component.
You'd say that you have the funk.
Something like that.
Something along those lines. All right, so I guess I'll talk a little bit about myself and my involvement with the world of music now.
Yeah.
So way back when I was but a wee lad. No.
You're still but a wee lad.
Hey, kind of. So when I was young, I don't have a lot of not fond meaning like that they were bad, but I just don't have a lot of, I guess, like vivid memories. But there's a picture of me in diapers sitting at my great grandmother's organ up at my grandparents' house, just like playing it. And I remember that there was this like little pre-programmed bass loop that you could turn on and off on the organ, and I would just like sit there and like rock back and forth to it. I don't know how much I played as a kid. I remember being told that I would do that and just listen to the little like doon da doon 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 da doon doon, just like over and over again, probably for hours, who knows, which makes sense now reflecting back on that, because anyway, I tend to listen to things in loops, and I'll just like listen to it like over and over and repeat it a lot. But so I kind of, I come from definitely a musical family in that regard. My dad, he plays guitar, drums, bass, is in bands. My mom played the guitar. She used to sing, and she still does, for herself and when she's able to. But it's definitely been a really big part of my life growing up in some regard or another. Mm-hmm. And I think that as I got older, I had a keyboard that was at my dad's house that had all sorts of like techno beats and things on it. I think it was the Yamaha DJ-X was the keyboard. And I had so much fun playing around with that and all of the effects and things on it. I eventually got my own keyboard and would play around with that and record songs on there that probably sounded awful, but that's okay. I was a kid.
Yeah, you can do anything when you're a kid.
That's the point. Exactly. There isn't that sense of this is bad. It's like, look what I made. And I wish I still had that and could be less judgmental of myself sometimes.
That's probably still the right way to create, but
it totally is. Totally is. I think what really hit it for me is when I got my first computer. I got a Mac Mini when I was in like 5th or 6th grade as a birthday gift. And it had GarageBand on it, and I just became so interested in GarageBand and all of the loops and the fact that I could take all these things and build them together. And I was essentially, making a Lego piece of music. I was taking all of the loops that were in GarageBand, stacking them together in a way that more often than not sounded musically sound or sounded musically engaging. And I did that for years up until like a sophomore in high school. maybe junior in high school or whatever. And then I stopped for a while, and I kind of just, my musical interest kind of went by the wayside. I think that was when I got to the point where I was a bit more critical of my work. And I also was to the point where I wanted to do more. I felt restricted by what I could or could not do in GarageBand, and also just my understanding of it. But it was actually you, of all people, good sir, that when you were starting to get interested in the production side of things, you were kind of like, you were researching like different programs and things, and you were asking me about it one time, and I was like, oh, I don't really know much about other digital audio workstations aside from Fruity Loops, which I had messed with on one of my dad's computers. And so I started doing research into it, and I was a part of a community at the time that had a very strong music presence. And between you sort of getting interested in that and me also rediscovering it, it really pushed me into where I am now, actually, which is just very, very much engaged in wanting to pursue music as, you know, maybe even a career option if it becomes possible. Music production in all forms. Primarily, I work with electronic music production and working with MIDI. I mean, my first thing that I created in the software I use now religiously, and I just am in love with, is Ableton Live. The first thing I made was this excessively long dubstep piece called Masquerade, but I still like it. It was pretty good. I had good intention behind what I was doing, but anyway, long story long because okay. I'm still talking.
Shut up already. No, I'm just kidding. Keep talking.
Words are still coming out of your mouth. What is this? If I just stop talking and there's no words, like if there was just silence, how awkward do you think that'd be for the podcast?
Shall we?
Yeah, it's pretty awkward. So we're just, I mean, we already do pretty good with the awkward silences every now and then. I don't think we need to intentionally inject more awkward into these things.
It's good to have awkward. You know, it makes the not awkward less awkward.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's all about that contrast. Anyway, so I do electronic music production. Lately, I've been much more interested in cinematic music production, strings and epic drums and stuff like that. But I'm really, the thing that I love so much is the hybrid of electronic music and orchestra, like just kind of that blending of things. I always love, if I can put piano or strings into something, I will. Like, but definitely something that I want to do going forward is I want to learn the piano, just because it's not something I've ever formally learned, and I can play enough to come up with a melody, but I don't have the whole ambidextrous playing with both hands thing down.
Yeah, it's definitely very challenging. I've been teaching myself, and I've been doing a lot of different exercises to get myself the two-handed play. I probably would benefit from a teacher at this point, but I have done a lot on my own, and I actually am pretty proud of my progress so far. I still have a long way to go, though. It's definitely very challenging, and it takes a long time to get your proficiency up, especially as you get into the more complicated stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely fair. I think that the hardest thing for me, if I was just teaching myself, would be keeping consistent with it and making myself practice. Back when I was younger and I was taking violin lessons, the thing I hated the most was practicing, but playing the violin was pretty fun. I still have my violin. I really should get it out and tune it and whatnot, but it's just, it's put away, and that takes effort.
I mean, honestly, what got me so into jazz was that, you know, my practicing started from a place of enjoying the music and playing what I wanted to play and playing what I felt. And definitely that's a large part of my approach to music, is really just kind of going with improvisation and going with the moment and kind of that form of expression.
I think that's true of me too. I remember one of the incentives my parents had to get me to practice the violin was they would be like, okay, practice what you're supposed to be playing, you know, the classical, whatever pieces, and then
go mess around.
Mess around. And I had this electric violinist, Jean-Luc Pontet. I had a CD of his, and
was a very famous like jazz fusion artist, by the way.
Yeah. and I would just like rock out to that and play my violin along with whatever he was playing, and just I think that's
super awesome.
Yeah, I kind of draw, I think, a lot from the improvisation as well. I like that a lot, and I think that I would like it even more if I had the proper ability to, you know, play the piano a bit more, or if I had a bit more of a classical understanding of how to play the piano, just because it's more conducive to being able to get what you hear in your head to actually come out instead of hitting the wrong keys a couple times or fumbling around trying to get to where you want to get.
Well, yeah, I think one of the nice parts about some of the more loose approaches is that if you are able to just pick out a melody, you can kind of start with that. And then, once you get comfortable with the melody, you can start to alter it a little bit. And then you can start to hear those changes after a while. You hear, oh, I play the melody like this, but if I change this note to this note, it sounds different. And like, as you're experimenting, for me, that experimentation really gives me a greater understanding. Whereas if I was just told, do this because it sounds like this, that's not going to stick with me quite as well.
Right. And that's, I think, just kind of, at least for us and maybe for a number of other people too, but it's the learning style of let me do it and then let me figure out or tell me the why. Yeah. And it'll be better than just do this thing. And I think that when I'm coming up with a melody or something, it's kind of similar to that. I'll play around, noodle, nothing makes sense, or it's just like, here's some notes, here's some other notes, and I'll hear something, I'm like, that's kind of cool, and I'll play it a few more times, and then I'll like expand on it once I have that initial thing down and add some other variations to it, and it kind of just like grows from there. Some of the most fun I've had is just sitting down at a piano and playing. Like one of the times I sat at a piano for a couple hours and I just recorded every single thing that I played, and I'll go back and listen to it and I'll be like, there's some really like good stuff in here that just came out of my brain randomly. And it might even just be a blip on the radar, but
that's a really good exercise. I really enjoy that exercise. And I think for creativity, especially music, like that's a really, really good approach. I've found a lot of value in that approach.
It's very freeing too. It kind of just like, there's no self-judgment and no self-criticism. Mm-hmm. You're in this very open and comfortable space where you can create and feel okay with whatever it is, because whatever it is, it's going to be gone in a minute, and that's all right. Like, you don't have to sell any specific melody or idea and be like, is this good enough? Should these notes be different or anything? It's just be open, be free, let the inspiration and creativity flow forth.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely, some of my favorite moments in music have just been those moments where I can feel it, and once you start to feel it in that way, the ideas just flow from your mind to your hands, or sometimes to the mouse even. Like you can just, you just understand where everything needs to be and what everything needs to be and how everything fits together.
I actually, if you don't mind me diverting a little bit to a story that kind of goes off of that one of the most interesting moments that I can recall is in terms of the disconnect between your brain and what you're conceiving and then actually being able to make it a reality, whether it's playing it on a piano or an instrument or writing it down as musical notes or clicking it in as MIDI. Like, I always think that the biggest disconnect there is being able to get yourself out of the way, like whether it's other thoughts or the physicality of actually doing the thing, to be able to actually think and visualize in whatever medium you're doing. So like if you want to play this melody on the piano, visualize yourself playing the melody on the piano. What notes would you press? What notes would you not, or that kind of thing. And I don't even, what had been 4 or 5 years ago now. It was on my birthday of all days. I had this melody in my head, but I wasn't just hearing it, or, it wasn't just there. I was actually picturing Ableton, the interface of the program. And I was picturing myself like having these notes in the MIDI like editor and where the notes were placed and the velocity of the notes. So how loud and how strong the notes were being played. Mm-hmm. And I knew exactly how I could make it. I knew exactly how or what I needed to do to make it a reality. And I got home and I immediately sat down and I made this melody. And it's not anything super complex, but that I was able to be like, this is exactly what I need to do. And I know what I need to do and I know what I want to do. And I did it. And it was a very unique experience that I don't know that I've had quite in the same way. I've thought of things and been like, this would be really cool to do, but usually I have to sit down and like struggle to figure out, okay, now what do I need to do? What effects or what, other things do I need to add? But it actually, what I've done with that piece of music is Now, every year on my birthday, I take that original piece of music and that original melody and I remix it into something new. And by something new, I mean,
oh yeah, that's a cool project.
I'm taking it and repurposing it, changing the genre, adding some more instruments to it or whatnot. And this past June on my birthday, it's my birthday music project. Essentially, I did +5. They're all called plus whatever. So the first one was +1 because it was my birthday, and I was like, level up.
Lol.
But just going back to the root of that was being able to visualize it and see exactly what I needed to do to see the end goal without any of that struggle was a really like freeing thing. And I think that that's one of the hardest things to do with any sort of creative or artistic endeavor, but it's great when it happens.
Yeah. What happens to me more often, and this is how a lot of my tunes have come into being, is I'll have an idea in my head and I'll jam on that idea in my head for a while. And then when I'll go to write it down, it'll come out different.
Yep.
It'll be something different, but it'll definitely be inspired by the original thing. And sometimes it'll even allow me to remember what the original thing was, just kind of by like cause and effect.
Right.
But it's interesting that it never quite is the same. It's just like the act of putting it down fundamentally changes it in some way.
Yeah, I have a bunch of audio notes that I've recorded on my phone over the years, probably 60 or more, that are just me humming a melody or beatboxing a drum beat or whatever, like, oh, I'm somewhere, I have this idea, let's record it so I can come back to it later. Right. And I think there's only been one that I've actually turned into something, because when I sit down and try to, translate that, as I call the process of getting it out of your head and into whatever, art form you're doing, mm-hmm. It's difficult. And a lot of the times I'm like, I really like this original idea and it's got to be like this. It has to have these exact same notes and it has to sound exactly the same, but it's never going to sound the same.
No,
there's always going to be something that's going to be a little different, because what's in your head is not reality. And it's not fair to expect it to be, but I definitely, I have to, when I am working off of a preconceived idea and I'm not just sort of sitting down and creating as I go, it definitely is important that I take a little mental step back and be like, hey, it can be different. Like, it's okay. Like, give myself a little bit of a pep talk. It's all right that it's a little different. Like, that it's still good. Like, you're still creating music. This is good. Keep on doing this.
I kind of ran into a similar thing earlier this week. I recently had to port a lot of my files over from one computer to another, and I changed versions of Ableton as well in the process. So there's a lot of stuff that's just like not working in weird ways, or like maybe I missed some files here or there. Like, like you use the collect all. It has a feature where it'll collect all the relevant files and put it places, but sometimes not everything quite lines up,
Yeah.
So I was just kind of struggling with, oh man, I can't get this particular part to sound the same. And I'm like, well, maybe it just needs to be different then.
Maybe it's time for a change.
I had some ideas for how it could be different anyway, so maybe I should just go with that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the other things that can sometimes be difficult, especially you were talking about, having a lot of things that are incomplete or works in progress, to kind of try to keep like your eyes forward while referencing what you have in the past. And I definitely have some pieces that I've completed that are older that I'm like, man, now that I'm where I'm at with my knowledge and just my proficiency, I want to go back and redo it because I love the original piece. But I think what I really love is I love the nostalgia that comes with the original piece. Like, this was one of the early pieces I ever made. It has such potential. I could make it a beautiful flower. But I think that it's much more important to keep going forward. And maybe for some people that does mean going back and revisiting and recreating some of those. But just as long as you aren't trying to like, dwell on things that you've done in the past. And that's definitely where I struggle with my works in progress, is because I'll open them sometimes and I'll be like, yeah, this is kind of cool. What could I do with this? And then I'm like, I don't really know what to do with this. And then I don't do anything. And that's fine, but I'll get frustrated with it because I'm like, I have all these things that aren't completed. Like, what am I doing,
Yeah, for me, especially because I really haven't completed much of anything in that way. I mean, there are things that are what they are, but they're not. It's hard to ever feel like a particular piece of art is where you want it to be. I think.
Oh, yes, definitely.
That's just like a fundamental feeling you have to be able to come to terms with and just be like, okay, it's done, or I'm done. I think it's more about you being done than it being done.
It's about you being able to say this is complete and this is finished, because, you know, you could tweak the EQ for weeks. Like, oh, I just need to raise it at 3K a little bit more, or, you know, whatever. I just need to tweak the threshold on this compressor just a little bit more to make it exactly where it needs to be. But like, you could do that forever. You could change a note back and forth 50,000 times, when sometimes you just need to be like, hey, this is good. This is done. You know, I definitely have a problem where I oversaturate my work sometimes. I'm like, oh, you know what would be great? Another layer of piano, another layer of synth. Let's add a second bass line. And it's like, dude, chill. Like, it's good where it's at. Don't overcomplicate things. But it's sometimes like, you know, I think it's fair to have that difficulty to call something complete, because especially if it's a longer project, like, you've invested a lot of yourself into this, and it's kind of difficult to eventually, you know, break that tie because you've nurtured and maintained it for so long. But it's definitely, finishing a project is like the hardest part of the creative process for sure.
Yeah. I think what I need to do as far as this album is concerned is just decide how long I want it to be, and then pick which tracks I'm going to do and have it be, or maybe decide I'm going to do, like, let's say it's like 4 things I've already written and write like 2 new tunes, and just like say what I'm going to do and then do that. Because I think once I give myself like a framework, that might help.
Yeah, probably.
But I'm not quite at that stage. I don't know. We'll see. It's definitely just so hard to manage actually doing the creative output, as well as like direct the ship, steer the ship in the right direction, you know?
Yeah, it is a challenge, because it kind of, that directing of the ship kind of gets in the way of you being an artistic individual. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to, there's a lot of planning and sort of intentionality going into the process of it, that sometimes it becomes too, like, I guess, clinical, and it loses some of the wonderfulness that is this mysterious creativity.
You're trying to avoid all the pitfalls that you learned about last time, but sometimes that like makes you not even think about doing the thing in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, so I feel like I'm very happy that we got to talk about music.
Yeah, it's nice. I like that we've got the music ice broken, so to speak.
I definitely want to, you know, continue talking about it on this podcast. It's definitely something that's very important to me, and something that I really like to talk about. And I think we have a lot of interesting thoughts to share about it. So
yeah, definitely.
You know, as far as gaming, I think music has been something that, surprisingly, I haven't been involved with as much, but you definitely have been a little bit. Do you want to just refresh me a little bit on some of the like video game music stuff that you have done so far? Because I feel like you've done more than I have.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I haven't actually done any music for any games in particular. I've definitely created a bunch of music with games in mind, just because that's definitely a direction I want to take my music. When I've played games in the past, primarily, you know, like Game Boy RPG games, like Golden Sun comes to mind, but games that just have a very unique and simple but wonderful soundtrack to them that really describes the setting. By describes, I mean through the listening ears, kind of describes all of that. And I think a lot of those games have really influenced me musically, just because that's where a lot of my music listening came to when I was growing up, was from all of the games I played. Like Ocarina of Time is probably a huge influence. Kirby and the Crystal Shards. I made a piece that it used the sound font from Kirby and the Crystal Shards.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was heavily inspired by a couple of pieces in there. But it's very fulfilling for me to try and tell a story of a setting, or to describe something using music. So I like kind of having the challenge of, you know, all right, you're in a desert and there's this thing that's happening, you know, okay, what is the thing? This character gets lost and then there's a fight. All right, well, how do I describe that in a way that is not using words and using music instead? a few months ago now, a few months ago, I released my first album called The Arbor, which was not video game related, was based off of this concept for a movie that I came up with. And so I was telling the story.
Story based, yeah.
Yeah, it's telling the story of these events that are happening only through music. And I mean, I wrote an outline that you can read as well, but I think that the biggest thing that I try to accomplish when I'm creating music is having an intention behind what I'm doing, like that there's a narrative underneath it. And I think that in video game music, what's really important is that it has that narrative, but it also kind of gets out of the way. Like there's some aspects where I notice music in video games because I'm really listening to it, but I'm going to pull the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess example because I always use this one. Music that's dynamic and flows with the action that you're seeing basically becomes second nature. It's like a good transition in a film. You don't notice that something has changed or, you know, the scene has changed.
But just like adds
it
to
just
the
happens.
ambiance and like immerses you in the scene. Yeah.
Right. And so in Twilight Princess, you're in Hyrule Field and you're exploring. And then as you get closer to an enemy, the music doesn't change to the battle music, or the battle music doesn't necessarily come in, but it essentially adds layers onto the music that's already there and slowly transitions into the battle music. So like now you hear horns, now you hear more intense strings and things like that. And with all of the boss fights, there's this very specific melody that plays when you can damage the boss. So you are cued with the music as to like, yes, you're doing something right. Remember this, because this is when you beat the boss before. And so it's a part of the game. It's a part of the game experience while not being music at the same time. Like, I mean, obviously it's music, but it kind of takes on another level, I feel like, that you don't notice it as music. You notice it as a part of the experience. And I think that that's something that is really just awesome and something I love about well done video game music for sure.
Yeah, it definitely makes me think of FTL actually, because I'm pretty sure FTL had, you know, each area had its own theme, and then there was the battle music for that area, which was then sort of like a more like hip or just like energetic version of a similar theme. Which for me, I really liked that. And it was all sort of like funky space music. If you're not familiar with FTL, it's a sort of space-based adventure roguelite type of game.
FTL being faster than light. It's the name of the game, but the acronym, just in case.
Yeah, you control a ship with a small crew of crew members, I guess. Yeah.
Humans, aliens, the like.
You have to go through space. But anyway, is really interesting electronic kind of music that, you know, I would definitely really like that transition element, you know, where now you're in battle and suddenly, you know, it's that familiar theme, but now the energy has increased, or, you know, it's changing how you feel about the scene. And so it adds to that sense of immersion, like you're really involved with what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's an important key in, well, any music, whether for film or video games, but like thinking about a lot of role-playing games, oftentimes characters have a certain theme, whether it's just a few notes that are in there or something. So whenever you see them or you're talking to them or a cutscene involves them, that those notes and that music play. And it's, again, to further on another level than just visual or text story. It's a way to further tie you to that relationship and draw you into things. So not only are you seeing the person, you're like, oh yeah, that's Bob. I remember Bob. Oh, I'm reading about Bob. Bob's a pretty cool guy. This is his story. Oh yeah, I'm hearing the
Bob's
music.
Funky saxophone lick.
Yeah, exactly. Like the funky sax man up there playing the saxophone, like do, just all day. Like this is Bob. This is totally Bob. No, did I go too far?
No.
Did I?
Just kidding.
Did I cross a meme line that shouldn't be crossed? Sorry.
The Kenny G references are painful, man. It hurts.
Yeah. I bet. Do you just like?
It hurts. 440, man. 440.
Oh man.
Yes. But you know, it's something. I think what also makes it effective is that it's subtle, and so you're thinking about what's going on directly in front of you, but then it adds those those kind of peripheral elements that really add to that immersive sense.
Yeah. And again, it's sort of like you notice it's there because you hear it, but you're not necessarily aware of what it's doing to you unless you're looking for it, I feel like. Mm-hmm. If it's done well, like if I'm just invested in playing a game and having fun and not like listening to the music, you know, I don't often notice that there's like a character's theme or something until I've heard it maybe the fifth time, and then I start listening to the music because I'm like, this is kind of cool. I'm like, wait a second, this music played before. I see what they're doing here. But yeah, it's definitely a nice way to kind of tie into that. Then,
by contrast, there are some games where the soundtrack is limited enough that you're just like, kill me. After a while, that it just feels like, for me at least, some games. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head for some reason, but actually, like as much as I love Civilization, I guess it's just because I play it so much. After a while, I just have to turn the music off and turn my own music on because I don't want to hear. It's basically like listening to the same album over and over and over and over and over again for a while. Whereas when you have the dynamic elements, you don't really get that same feeling. Whereas in like strategy-based games and games where it's not like a specific story-based progression, I think you have more of just like a soundtrack. These are the tracks that play in a certain sequence, but they play to completion each time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean,
there's like different categories of how it's used.
Yeah, and there like if you're doing a battle though, I would imagine that the music is different during the battle, like if you're fighting other units, or is it just the same sort of background music that plays the whole time?
Well, some of the earlier games had like different music for when your Civ was at war versus not at war, but
it's just sort of a background soundtrack that's going on.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely interested as we start to fool around with making our own games and that kind of stuff. I'm definitely interested to start delving into some of the more dynamic music possibilities. I know we've talked about that a lot. It's definitely something that's fascinated me. And definitely, coming from a more improvisational side of things on the music side, I'm now interested to think about like, okay, well, how does an AI deal with music? And so that's kind of an added level that I'm interested in delving into at some point.
Yeah, that would definitely be interesting. We'll have to see how that goes. I'm curious. I'm also curious I always just like hearing new music from you. So anytime you create new stuff or you create the album you're working on, like be sure to send it my way. Not that you wouldn't, but I mean, do it so that I can listen to it. Do it for me. Well, I'm going to be selfish. Make the music so that I can hear it.
I need to finish it so that, the listeners can listen.
Yes. The listeners. Get the announcer voice thing on. Hello. You are now listening, listeners. Is that what? So, I mean, I guess listeners or audience, either of those are appropriate.
I almost said viewers, but that's not quite accurate.
Viewers. Well, I mean, you could be staring at like the little iTunes thing or the QuickTime loading bar. Yeah, just like very slowly tick across as the seconds of your life drift downward from the sand and the hourglass.
I think it's one of those things that people like a steady progression. And it doesn't even really matter if the progression is slow or is very challenging or, is very punishing. People just like that slow progression. And, I think, that's a very nice segue into talking about our next topic, which is dungeon crawlers and roguelikes.
AKA punishing. Permadeath is death. Like, you're dead permanently. Right?
You're punishing me with that.
Okay. No, but yeah, so
anyway.
Dungeon crawlers and roguelikes, like we talked about Demise a little bit earlier, as sort of this, I almost said primitive. I don't know that that's quite the right word, but early
prehistoric
pioneer, the prehistoric pioneer into. No, but it was, while it didn't have permadeath, definitely that sense of dungeon crawling and exploration is a big factor in roguelike games because that's the whole incentive. I mean, there's a stage that you want to complete and get to, but like the journey is getting there a little bit and then failing and then getting a little bit further and then failing
some more.
So I guess just for some clarity in case anyone is curious. So roguelike as the genre. The genre roguelike is kind of a weird like genre title in general.
It's based off of the original game Rogue was text-based. Actually, it had text graphics, in fact. So you'd have like dashes and like underscores, which were the walls of the like rooms, and the different enemies would show up as different characters, and your character showed up as a character. But it was a randomly generated dungeon crawling game. And the goal was to get to the end of the dungeon, and it was very difficult, and you would probably die on floor 1 the first time you played, and there was like 20 floors or something like that. It definitely falls into this similar category of dungeon crawling games. But I think one of the main distinctions between like roguelikes and Demise or Grimlock like traditional dungeon crawlers is where whether or not the map is procedurally or random generated versus like a static, pre-designed map. And that's definitely the thing that made Rogue unique, was that it was randomly generated. And so roguelikes are characterized by games with these procedurally or randomly generated elements. And then also they tend to have permadeath as well, so that when you start the game, once you die, you have to start over from the beginning.
And they're typically not super, super long for that reason, just because, you wouldn't want to play a game for an hour or 2 hours and then have to start completely over. I mean, there are definitely some that are really in depth and can get, long depending on how you're playing or what you're playing as. But the whole point behind the procedural generation is that replayability. Like, you're supposed to die, you're supposed to lose, you're supposed to get a game over, and you're supposed to go back, because the fun is seeing what's different. And as you play more and more, you learn the game. And by learn the game, I don't just mean like how to shoot or how to click button. It's like you learn what the game. Web? Yeah, you learn what the game is telling you about shotting web. Like what it like means,
why you should shot web, and then what.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the zen of web shot.
Yeah, if I shot web, okay, actually, I need to stop. It's going to be too much. But it's if you do a thing, what the cause and effect is and what that means. And so it's learning an enemy. Oh, there's this really armored enemy. Well, I can't attack him from the front. I know that now because he ran over me and I'm dead. And so it's very punishing in terms of how you learn, but it's an interesting way to teach the player what the game mechanics are without giving them an instruction book.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that these two genres, I think why, we can talk about them together, are so similar. Despite having some, such a core mechanic that is so different as far as like a static map versus something that's randomly generated. But I think it's the experience of learning how to deal with the game as you play it,
coping with it.
Right. As you play The Binding of Isaac, which is a popular roguelike game, you learn how to deal with the enemies. You learn their movement patterns, you learn how they shoot, you learn strategies for dealing with them. And so maybe you don't have to use those strategies in the same combination every time, but over time your understanding of the world, even though it's randomly generated, increases. Whereas in games like Demise, your actual understanding of the physical world increases, and you also get a better sense of how to deal with it as that happens. It does sort of have permadeath in the sense that you can't save and load, but it's not permadeath in the sense that, like, the character's gone, you have to start the whole world over. So there's sort of an interesting spectrum as far as player punishment, dealing with player failure. When the players or the player doesn't succeed, what happens? And that's always been something that I've been really fascinated about in gaming, is how that design choice is made.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes I'm left wanting more with how games deal with player failure. Yeah. I think a really strong example, while not a dungeon crawler or a roguelike, but Skyrim, which I have a pretty strong feeling everyone is aware of what Skyrim is at this point. Yeah. Open world exploring game. It's great. You can spend a lot of time in it. But the thing, and it can be a really immersive game, but dealing with player failure in that game it's not dealt with. You die, you reload the save. And there's a lot of games that work that way. And I think that something that I wish games would do more, and what roguelite games, which is, I guess, a subcategory of roguelikes.
Basically just means permadeath games with some like random component at that point.
Yeah. So with that, you lose, you get a game over, you fail, but it's not like, okay, well, now you start over with nothing, try and do it again. Usually you gain something from that. So you gain points to unlock more items in the dungeon, or while you go through, you find new items that then become available in the dungeon, or after you get to a certain point, new things will unlock and things like that. And I think that it creates a sense of, okay, you failed, but you're still progressing in the game. Like it tells the player that while you're expected to fail, that doesn't mean you're doing bad. It means you're doing what we want you to be doing. And I think that a lot of times with games that do the save and load, it feels
like, oh, I fucked up. Now I've just got to reload my save. Oh, did I make a save recently enough? Or like, then there's all that. But then if the game gives you save points, in some ways, I think it's better to have like save points, because then you don't have to worry about whether you saved or not. Like if it's just like an auto saving, like sometimes like shooter games, actually it's kind of nice because it's not ever too far back, but at the same time, then it doesn't really feel like it matters. So you lose impact.
Yes, definitely the loss of impact. Like I've been in so many situations in Skyrim where it's like, all right, I'm in a dungeon, I'm saving, I go forward, I fight a spider kills me. I'm like, well, now I'm back at the start of this dungeon. Let's round 2, me and the spider kills me again. All right, round 3, me and the spider, let's go. Spider kills me a third time. I'm back at the start of the dungeon and I've reloaded for the 4th time, and I'm like, now I could go and fight the spider
I don't care
again
anymore.
But he's probably going to kill me, so forget this dungeon and I'll leave. And I think that it doesn't deal with the problem of player failure. It just sort of is like, well, let's pretend that didn't happen. Like, you'll do better next time. Like, it kind of like
think about the actual narrative of your character, because the loads and saves are like, well, that timeline just didn't exist. We're just going to nip that one in the bud. The actual timeline is just like the character did everything perfectly at all times and just like sailed through all the challenges. And it's like, well, that's not actually an interesting story when you think about it, but you're getting that story in like chopped up bits and pieces.
Yeah. And I was going to make a side comment. Speaking of loading and saving, I wish we could load and save a few days prior to this week for the United States. That's all I'm going to say. And we can move on. But it's just, I think, not the best means of handling a player narrative-driven story like Skyrim. Mm-hmm. I think that there have been a couple mods that exist to not a whole lot of success in trying to cope with dealing with player failure, in terms of like you die, but you still continue forward. Like you lose some of your items, or they do sort of like the Dark Souls thing where you have to get back to where you were and retrieve your souls and whatnot. But I just think that roguelikes sort of deal with it in a really great way by saying, you're going to die, you're going to lose, you're going to fail, and that's okay. And we want you to keep playing because that's the point. Like, you're supposed to fail. And I actually, maybe it's stretching a little far, but it kind of creates like a good culture around failing. Like, it still sucks that you fail, but it makes it kind of like, okay.
It's like part of the process, you know?
Yeah.
Which is you do life. As much as you can, and then you're, oh, I'm done. I ran out of juice.
Yep.
Yeah. Another game actually, which I liked as a kid, I'm not sure if you played this at all, but had an interesting set of failure mechanics, was Sid Meier's Pirates.
I did not play that. But
so it was a kind of pirate exploration combat trading game. You were the captain of a pirate ship, and you could go around raiding other ships. You could capture them into your fleet. You could actually have like 5 ships in your fleet at once or something like that, and like take on enemy fleets. You could actually capture towns and like hire like soldiers to capture some of the towns on these islands. It was in the Caribbean.
That's cool.
So it was actually really cool. But one interesting element that it had, which is, relating to how you deal with player failure, is like when your ship got sunk, it wasn't that you just died and had to reload the save. Well, now either I think you could become like stranded on some island, and then your character was like out of commission for like some number of months, but then you like got back, but then okay, now you don't have a ship anymore, now you have to find a new crew, so it's like start over, but you're still the same character. Or you could get like captured by the enemy and like thrown in prison, and then there was like some mechanics for having to try and escape from prison, and then you have to try and make it back to a friendly port and find a ship again. And so like those kind of elements where sure, the player has failed, but you're not just going to kill them off immediately. You're going to make them do something. You're going to add to the challenge. You're going to you're going to give them another obstacle to overcome because they failed. Like, so they have to kind of, it changes the game in that way. I really like those kind of elements because I think it adds to that dynamic and immersive nature when now the game is just responding to your decisions, but it's not just like, okay, well, you suck, start over, like, or you failed, reload your save. It just, I feel like it adds to the flow and the game flows better.
Definitely. And that's really cool. How old is that game? Do you know?
Super old. I think there was the game I played was actually like a remake of a even older game.
Okay.
But I think it came out for Xbox before the 360.
Because that's really cool. I appreciate that a lot because I think that it adds a lot to gameplay. Like you're saying, it's not, oh, I died, like time to start over, but it's, oh, I died. Now there's more gameplay. Like I can keep playing, I can continue on. But I think since the birth of gaming with Mario or whatever, wherever you want to claim it started or truly began, that there has been very much a test. Like it's a test of your skill, of your investment. And so to do good, you must live and succeed. And to lose, you have to try again.
Right. The challenge is rewarding. And I think that's always been a fundamental element of games is that challenge and that reward.
But it doesn't fit everywhere. It's not a good like gameplay strategy for every kind of game. You can't have every game play out where you've got 3 lives and you didn't get another one up, so game over, go back to the castle or to the beginning of the game. It requires a bit more finesse in terms of how you're going to handle with the player failing. And I think that it's important for immersion because, especially if you're doing any sort of role-playing game or a game where immersion is a factor, which for any game I feel it should be to some degree, because they're not feeling slighted about the fact that, oh, I'm playing a game because I got to reload, whatever. But I also think that it's just important because of the gameplay elements that it adds. And it opens up a whole new world for possibility. And maybe it's not like you have to escape from jail or, get back to your friendly port, but maybe it's, hey, well, now I'm not this captain anymore. I'm now one of the people I recruited who was at port somewhere else.
So it's like the cause that I was trying to accomplish.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there's a lot of options for doing it. And I think that that's something I would love to see explored more often with gameplay and having it. I mean, it's difficult to always necessarily create an outcome for every player action, but giving that player feedback or giving the feedback to the player actions in terms of, well, I died, now what? It's nice and very important, like recognizing the fact that the player has control. It gives them a lot more sense of control, I feel
when you feel like there's a range of possible outcomes based on what you do, it definitely makes it feel like the world is more responsive to your behavior. If you're either going to just fail or do it the right way, I think it's harder to become as engaged as opposed to when you feel like, this choice that I make, depending on these other factors, could go so many different ways. That adds, I think, an extra element to games that I really appreciate. Definitely.
And I think when you have something like permadeath or the fact that failure is real and you don't just get out of jail free card, that it adds a lot more weight behind your decisions. Like if you're playing a roguelike game, you're like, do I go in that locked door and see what it is when it could be a room full of monsters or it could be a shop, or do I just leave and go to the next floor? Like, it adds a lot more weight behind your decisions, even if it, for any other game, you could be like, well, I'll just save outside the door, open it, and if it's monsters and I get killed, I'm out of here.
Yeah, and for some of these roguelike games too, like Isaac, for example, Binding of Isaac, which is, I've played a lot of it, your failure takes place over time. It's not like you just die immediately. I mean, except at the very start. But, how you fail is, you take a little bit too much damage in one room and you don't get quite enough healing maybe in the next few rooms. And then take a little bit too much damage on the boss. And the game kind of chips away at you over time. And so I think that's also very interesting that you're kind of gradually feeling your chances of success slip away as opposed to just like, oh, whoops, I didn't dodge the attack, so I died.
Yeah, it's not quite an immediate. There are some games that definitely have that, but I think for the ones that feel better to play, it's a bit more gradual. But it also gives you a sense of like, I took a lot of damage in that room. I screwed up. There's a strong level of accountability.
Yeah,
like
the game can still be punishing because, you need to not take damage to live.
Yeah, and because of the random factor, like you go into a room, you might get kind of screwed on what enemies are in the room based on, what items you have.
Right.
However, it's how you handle with that unknown, how you deal with it, that is the important decision making. So like if you're in a situation where you're like, I have weird items, these are strong enemies, what do I do? And you take a bunch of damage, you're like, well, now I know to do this next time or to try something else. And again, that's kind of that natural learning that happens as you're playing the game, which is pretty cool.
I've been thinking about exploration gameplay a lot, and I definitely feel like you kind of need that negative feedback in some ways, or you need that added challenge to make the exploration engaging. Like, if you can just walk over to the other side of the map, and even if the monsters over there kill you, it's like, okay, well now I know it's over there, and now it doesn't matter. Like, if you just reload the save and go back there again. Whereas like with the roguelike, the exploration feels engaging because if you go into that room, you're going to find out what's there, but you also might die.
Yeah.
It gives your decisions impact, which I think makes the exploration really compelling. And I love exploration gameplay, and I'd love to see games do that more.
That's a really good point, tying that decision into the exploration, because it does add a different level to it. Again, I'm thinking in terms of Skyrim, but like if in Skyrim, you go into a cave or a dungeon or whatever, and you're like, hey, there's a spider, and you die to the spider, save, reload, and you can just brute force your way past it. If you're like, I want to beat this dungeon, beat the first spider, quickly save, and then just keep doing it until eventually you win, if at all possible, or if not, then you will leave. But like, if there's something that continues the game beyond that, you go in there and you die, and you have to like either go back there to get your items, or you can't get your items because it's, this cave is out leveling you, then like you have to be careful in terms of what you do. And roguelikes do a pretty good job of teaching you that early on. Like you need to be aware of what you're doing, because if you mess up, like you're going to take a lot of damage. It's going to hinder you progressing further in the game. And I mean, for a game like Skyrim, it is a little different, but I still, this is just me, more like wish fulfillment or wish
Right.
ideation here. Like I wish that there was something that was able to give you that desire to explore, but also make it so like there are challenges that you can't conquer right away. So like you're aware that, if I don't have the right item in a roguelike game, like if I don't have the right item, that these types of enemies are going to be more difficult, so I should like try and avoid them, or knowing that like the boss that's coming up or that might be coming up, I need to prepare for. But with Skyrim, where the game levels with you, or at least the vanilla Skyrim, the game levels with you.
Doesn't really seem to matter.
No, you can walk wherever you want and do basically whatever you want at any point in time. And I mean, that makes for good exploration in terms of you can go anywhere you want at any time. But I think that removes a lot of the gravity of you making those decisions. And, it's very different in terms of genres, but it would be nice to kind of see other games stylistically draw from roguelikes, at least in terms of how they deal with exploration and punishment and player failure.
One element that I think would really help in this regard is having some sort of retreating mechanic, or just ability or incentive for the player to encounter something and then run away, or go a different path. And I think, maybe that's why we haven't seen these elements in so many games. Is there's definitely still somewhat of a linear mindset, I think. But as games become more open and more dynamic, I think that would help with the exploration. If you can go into a cave, see a like crazy spider, have it like do some damage to you, but then like, okay, maybe I need to get out, or maybe you can figure out another way to get in the cave. Maybe there's there's always other stuff, another path that you can take. Like when you have those other paths and you have those other options, I think it adds to that failure success dynamic in a really interesting way, because now you're kind of forced to assess your chances, or potentially retreat and maybe like give yourself an advantage in a different way.
That is interesting. I hadn't really thought about the retreating mechanic, but that's a really good point. And I definitely would love to see that explored a little bit, because you're right. Games are by and large very linear. I mean, I think roguelikes are definitely a linear thing. Like you're going, and while the rooms and paths you might take may be a little bit different, there is one direct end goal, and it's to beat the game. But even for other games that sort of set you up in that situation, like the objective, like, so again, since I've been using Skyrim, the objective is to beat the dungeon or to clear it or whatever. It's not,
there isn't success except for doing that.
Right. And so that actually kind of draws back around to the interesting aspect of like survival gameplay, where, when I was playing Don't Starve again, which I talked about briefly earlier, there are definitely many moments where you have to retreat. Like if you don't have enough gear and there are spiders chasing you, you're going to die if you don't run away and hope that they stop chasing you.
Right. And it's not like the game is just like killing you randomly. It's like, you've messed up if you put yourself in that situation and then it does kill you.
Right. But it definitely encourages you to retreat. It encourages you to be like, hey, there's spiders over there. They're there now. So you can come back when you're geared or when you're ready or feel comfortable to.
Just be prepared for this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I that is really interesting to have a concept of retreat that is more, I guess, apparent to the player. Because I mean, thinking about like the storylines of like first person shooter games or things like that, it's very linear, like go through, do the thing, keep moving forward, kill the things, get to the next checkpoint, and like keep going forward. Unless the story is telling the characters to retreat,
but then you're still progressing through forward checkpoints.
Right. There's not like, and not backtracking for the sake of doing the same thing over again, but for an understanding that there's like this ebb and flow to the progress, that like sometimes in order to progress to the left, you need to step back and go to the right a little bit and then go to the left.
Mm-hmm. That's, bringing Demise back into it. That's an element that Demise had. I don't know if you remember that, but when you went into a room and you were like, oh, I've seen that monster before. That's what killed me before. Sometimes you're like, nope, I'm going to back out. And you just run out of the room and you try and find a different way around. Because the dungeon floors were so expansive that there was always going to be some other like pathway down. There were many ways to go down. There were many fewer ways to go back up, though, which is what made it... You didn't always necessarily want to go down there, but that's also part of what made the exploration interesting. Like, you could step off a ledge and fall to the next floor, but maybe you don't know if there's a way back up or not. Like,
yeah.
That was another, like, having that unknown element. Again, maybe you're cutting off your retreat option there. Like, when you have those mechanics, suddenly then, like, selectively taking them away or adding them back in just adds so much to the gameplay.
So then... I get that there is this sense of desire for a bit of a dice roll, for a bit of randomness, or for a bit of that uncertainty. And I like with roguelikes, especially the procedurally or randomly generated ones, like it's something that is integral to the game. Like you don't know what you're getting into, but you're going to do it anyway, and you're going to learn from it. Hopefully, is the goal,
right?
Like, or your skill,
like being put in those situations and then having to adapt and having to figure out what to do. And it sounds like, you were talking about Don't Starve is very similar to that, like it almost is that survival element, but that survival and the exploration, the expiration
potential,
of the survival.
The expiration of your failure.
But the kind of survival / exploration is almost like its own dynamic. I feel like they play off of each other really well.
Yeah, and it definitely, again, it's sort of like a bit of an ebb and flow in terms of, or maybe give and take is a better way to describe it. But it's important to have a bit of well-roundedness to that, because you want some randomness, because it adds replayability and adds intrigue and adds some of that mystery. Like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next, even if you've played the game 50 times.
Right.
You might know what is going to be, like how to deal with what's in the room, but you don't know exactly what it will be. So it adds that sense of mystery even to something that's been done a lot of times.
But at the same time, you don't want it to be so random that's just like, oh, and now there's this like Titan who just raffle stomps me and then I'm just like randomly dead. It needs to, I definitely feel like these games are most successful when you feel like your failure is as a result of your decisions. And I think that's just something in like game design in general that's fairly true. But I think it really is kind of a core element to like roguelike games or permadeath games, is it definitely needs to feel like if there's a final end failure, you got yourself there. The game didn't just like randomly like poop on you.
Yeah, it definitely, I think that's, again, in kind of player feedback, I think that's something that's really important about it, is that the game is telling you through actions of the gameplay or through your inactions in the gameplay that you messed up and you have to deal with it through the result of starting over in, the situation of roguelikes. But it is important to have that balance, because I think there's been a number of games or situations just where you get into a quote unquote random situation or chance encounter, and it's like, and one-shotted, like, haha, hope you saved. And that sucks. That feels terrible, because
that's
usually
not a good kind of punishing. That's not a good kind of challenging.
Yeah, usually in those situations, you're not given a chance to retreat. It's like the dice has been rolled and now you have a random encounter, so good luck. And it just kind of like requires you to deal with it in terms of dealing with it, which is either like, fight to the death or just reload right then and there. I think.
But then when you have those elements of, either like retreating or corpse recovery in the case of Demise,
right,
it gives you like a chance to kind of make up for your failures, and it sort of eases the pain of the randomness. Something random can happen, but maybe it just changes how you have to deal with it. Yeah, you have to do a lot more to deal with it now, but you can deal with it. It gives you the tools to do so. So yeah, like you're saying, it creates this ebb and flow, and I really think it like smooths out the gameplay.
Oh yeah, and I appreciate that in roguelikes as well, where you are still progressing by unlocking items and doing stuff even when you die. Like you get a little bit further, you unlock something new and cool. So it's still, it's not this continual slamming your head against the wall until you get better at the game to progress. There is some of that, of course, but it also kind of is like, look, you're still doing cool stuff. We're giving you things. Like, we understand you're going to die, like it's tough, but have some fun new items to go along with it.
Binding of Isaac actually gets harder as you go down, though.
And like unlock more things.
You unlock more things, but then it also like upgrades the enemies in the early floors, which is probably a good thing, because as you get some of the like more advanced items, the early floors become fairly trivial, and then it sort of eases the like grind feeling that you would have of, oh, now I have to go through all these floors that like I already know how to beat, but now they're like harder, and now it's just like the challenge keeps amping up. It definitely levels off eventually, but
yeah, it's kind of like a new game plus without having to be a new game plus mode.
But it does it sort of like gradually over the lifetime of the game, which is kind of interesting.
That's nice. And that's really cool that it's not necessarily just this switch that you turn on or off, but like you've been playing for, 500 hours now and you have a bunch of items unlocked. So you probably are pretty good at the game. So things are going to be more difficult. Actually, now that I'm remembering it, doesn't it say that it says the game just got harder or something?
Yes, it does.
There's actually like when you unlock certain things, it tells you that.
When you beat certain boss thresholds as well.
Gotcha. But yeah, I think that's cool, because the game is sort of recognizing, you've done well to get here, young grasshopper. Now prepare for more challenge.
Have you heard of the concept fuzzy logic?
I've heard of it. I'm not super familiar with it, though.
All right. So I'm assuming you're familiar with binary logic, true, false, 0, 1.
Yeah.
So fuzzy logic is, instead of having only those two states, you have on, off, but then you have some in-between space where it's fuzzy. So maybe you have like, it's like, if you think about a graph, it starts at 0 and then it's like a line, like with like a gradual slope up to 1, as opposed to just like going straight up.
Right.
So in this case, what we're talking about is, instead of like success or failure, you have like, gradual states of like, you take more damage over time, or, things are slightly different, but maybe it's not just like you have this element or you don't have this element. Places where you give it more of a spectrum of outcome. So I just thought that was kind of what I was thinking about when we were talking about this conversation, with all these elements. So
it's less like, okay, now it's hard mode plus. It's like, now it's like hard mode ish. Now it's like hard mode more ish. Now it's kind of like hard mode almost plus, and it's not even, it might not even like necessarily have the levels. It's more of a gradient to get there.
Right. I think with Isaac, it does it in various steps, but since it's not like huge steps, I mean, some of them can be large, but like the entire length distance that you travel in terms of the difficulty increase, you don't do it all at once. It does it in steps. And I think that allows you to cope with it And it also makes it feel like a natural progression, because then it sort of sinks in with gradually how you're getting better at the game, because you have to get to certain progression thresholds to make the game harder. So it like really fits nicely.
Yeah.
Well, I know I could definitely talk about roguelikes and dungeon crawlers forever. So we should probably move on to our mystery sound segment.
Yeah, you could definitely crawl around in dungeons and roguelike caverns forever as well, until you die permanently.
I'm a bit of a rogue because I like to crawl around in dungeons.
Wah, wah.
That involved all of the words. I have the best words.
Oh, no, we're moving on immediately right now. So
that's a mystery sound we don't want to learn about.
No, not even. Again, like every episode, we've got 3 mystery sounds that I have that I'm going to make Sir Quactical guess, and he's got 3 mystery sounds that he has very finely chosen for me to painfully try and guess.
Sir Quack.
Yeah, you got me pretty good last time.
Oh, yes.
Who went first last time? Does it matter? Who wants to go first?
You should go first because I don't remember what mine were.
So, meaning play you a sound first?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So, this is my mystery sound numero 1. Hopefully this isn't too loud. Here we go. So there's that.
Is that a mass relay from Mass Effect?
It is.
Ding, ding, ding.
You are correct.
Do I have to guess which game? I mean, the sound's the same, isn't it? Or is it not the same?
I don't know if it's the same sound or not. But sure, go ahead. Guess a game.
2?
I mean, I pulled it from Mass Effect 1, but yeah, I don't know how different they were. Also note, we now have correct and incorrect sound effects that we'll be playing. So enjoy that. But yeah, you're right, 100%.
Oh, but we don't get to hear them live? Oh, no.
No, I played
so
it.
Sad.
I played it.
Oh, I missed it. You should play it again.
Okay. Guess again, so that we'll just redo that little part. Guess it.
It was Mass Effect.
It was Mass Effect. It was Mass Effect the whole time. Ah! You're correct.
Ding, ding, ding. Oh, I thought you just said that.
Nope, that's you. Remember last episode when you were like,
right? I remember this now.
Yep. There you go. Oh,
man.
It's all coming back.
That's a really good podcast moment. Is where I don't realize that my own voice isn't you.
That's fair. Our voices, well, they're different enough. I feel like that it doesn't sound like one of us is just talking to ourselves.
I'll catch on with the next sound.
Right. But yeah, so the Mass Effect relay, or the Mass relay from Mass Effect, is a pretty. It's a cool sound. Like,
I would say it counts as iconic at this point.
Yeah, definitely. But I figured you'd appreciate that. All right.
Definitely.
Here is now your sound clip for moi. Ooh. Oh man, my brain is racing. I feel like it's from a shooter. No?
You could call it a shooter.
Is it from Sleeping Dogs?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man.
Oh my gosh. It's like shooter to Sleeping Dogs.
Well, a GTA style sort of thing, but yeah, I thought I recognized it. It's kind of had that sound.
It's actually very little shooting in that game, but yeah.
It's mostly hand-to-hand combat, but oh man.
Yeah, it's one of the menu themes.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh, Sleeping Dogs is such a great game.
I know.
Like,
I was definitely, since we were talking about music, I was in a little bit of a funky mood, so I was like, there's definitely some funky music, so I thought I would bring that in. But yeah, I also loved Sleeping Dogs.
I need to play that again, just in terms of it has a great story, but I think actually, like you were saying, there's very little shooting in it. I think that kind of lended a lot to the game. It has a neat sort of Arkham City Batman style combat thing going on.
And then when in the story missions, when suddenly like, oh, now I have this SMG, it's like shit's going down.
Yeah. And it handles the intensity of having guns a lot better than I think other games do. It's more real with it. It's like having a gun is kind of a big deal, and like it makes things much more dangerous and scary, and it kind of gives you more of the gravity of the situation in that regard. But
yeah, it definitely has a high impact in that sense,
Man.
which I really like. I like that where you have variable impact. You know, some parts of the game aren't so intense, and then like all of a sudden you're in a really intense part. And I think that contrast really adds to the immersion.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that contrast, like you said, is really important. So nice music clip. I'm kind of surprised I got it. Oh wait, yeah, I got it correct. I get a
ding ding ding. Yeah, I forgot about it. Now you forgot about it.
Yeah, well.
Do we both get an because of that? Oh, that's just such a great noise.
Yep. All right, so now I've got my mystery sound for you, numero 2. A little bit of music for you.
Oh, well, that was intense. Now, see, I'm definitely thinking that that's from a shooter. I almost want to say Spec Ops: The Line.
Nope.
Okay. That was kind of a wild guess.
It is from a shooter. I'll give you that.
I don't know. You're gonna need to give me a hint.
It's so it's not realistic graphics. The graphics are kind of cartoony.
Is that from an Unreal Tournament game?
Nope.
Oh wow. Damn.
It's from a game, actually. I think you've logged a lot of hours in it, and this is from the first in the series. Well, there's multiple games. I believe there's 3 of them, but they're not labeled 1, 2, and 3. It's like labeled 1, 2, and then like it's like a earlier, they like go back and do story from before the first one.
What?
There's a robot in the game that trash talks a lot.
Oh, is it from Borderlands?
Yeah.
Ding ding ding. Oh, that was a very sad guess by me. So I guess is that from the pre-sequel then?
No, that's actually from Borderlands 1. It's just I believe it's when you're fighting the bandits or something.
Oh man, it's been so long since I played Borderlands 1, and I've logged so many hours, like you said, into Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel that it's just like,
yeah,
that's like years in the past.
Well, it's definitely, I think it has pretty well-designed music for the environment and the atmosphere that the game is in, and that's just kind of why.
Yeah, it's very has nice ambience in that sense.
Yeah, I appreciated that music clip for sure.
Absolute failure of a guess by me, though.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll see how the next one goes. So now I get to guess
soundboard, though.
Your mystery clip numero 2. Should stop saying numero 2. Like, is that offensive? It just apologies if it.
Just play the clip.
Okay. Anyway, next. Yeah, I love when things are relevant. That is the battle music from FTL.
It's not just the battle music; it's the Mantis battle music.
Oh, it is?
It's different for every one of the areas. Yeah.
Oh, see,
yeah.
I didn't.
But yes,
I didn't realize that there were different battle musics for the different.
Yeah, that's what enemies. I learned when I was looking this up. That it was like there's just a normal like exploration theme for each of the areas, and then there's the battle theme, and it's a similar melody.
Huh. That's cool.
But yeah, we're continuing the tradition of secretly revealing one of the sound clips ahead of time.
Yeah. Also, I get a correct.
Ding ding ding.
Because I was right.
That's correct.
But again, like talking about when we were discussing music earlier, that it's really simple. Like there's not a ton of stuff there, and yet it speaks a lot to what's going on. There's this sense of mysteriousness in the music. There's this just like
sense of danger.
Yeah, danger and tension. and it's very simple. Like it's so well done. And when you can deliver exactly what you need to with an emotional value like that, and then you're like, and I'm done. Like, oh, it's great. It's so great.
Yep.
But yeah, so, haha, what does that mean? I'm winning technically?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
you're winning today.
You beat me last time. So, all right.
I beat you.
Apologies in advance for this.
Is this the hard one?
It might be kind of difficult, but yeah. So here we go. That's it.
Oh.
It's just
help.
It's just a little sound effect stinger.
You want to play it again?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's like ringing so many bells.
Okay.
And yet I'm like, I don't know.
No, this is kind of what I thought, because that was sort of what I felt like. So we discussed this game already in the podcast. I discussed it.
Is it from Don't Starve?
No. Oh, right. Whoops. Slacking on my soundboard.
This is the part of the podcast where I just make strange noises into the microphone to cover up the fact that I have no idea where that noise came from.
So
anyway,
you've likely played a lot of hours in this game, as have I, and there's a lot of exploring, and this sound in particular plays when you finish exploring an area or complete an objective that is maybe not necessarily apparent to the player.
Can you play it again?
Yeah.
I actually am like drawing a huge blank on this one too.
Okay.
Give me another meh.
I'll give you another meh. I mean, you didn't even guess, but that's fine. Most of the land you explore is snowy. I guess not most of it, but a good 50% of it is. It's a big land based on Nordic tradition.
Oh, Skyrim?
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Wow.
So that was, yeah, I figured that one would be kind of difficult, but I wanted to pick it because it's one of those audio cues that, so after you complete a dungeon or a tomb or whatever you're exploring.
Oh yeah, now I can totally place that now.
Yeah, you open the last door and you get to the treasure chest, or you find the word wall, or you finish exploring an area, which that's what I meant when it's not necessarily apparent that this just sound plays, and it's this very like rewarding and fulfilling noise.
Once you know what it means.
Yeah, but it's not like a uh-oh, something's about to happen noise. It's not a I need to be aware noise. It's like a yes, good job noise. Like even just I feel hearing it out of that context, it kind of has like this mysterious but resolved sound to it. And I mean,
mysterious but satisfying.
Yeah, I think clearly I'm biased because I know the context for it, but
yeah,
I think it does a pretty good job conveying its intention. So I just wanted to include
definitely
that.
In context, it does.
Yeah. But yeah, again, going, I guess, with the tradition of talking about the things, they're the games that our sounds are to. But, oh well, we do what we can. All right, now you're up, number 3.
Third, you're up.
Oh. Well, you know what? That had me 100% stumped until the Mew. Like,
really?
Yeah, I was like, I did the same sort of thing. I was like, oh, I can see it. I know what this is from. I can just feel it. And then the Mew gave it away. That's from Pokemon Snap. Specifically when you're in the like rainbow world or whatever, trying to take pictures of Mew, I would guess.
You should play the sound effect.
Oh, yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. It's going to make me chuckle for a while, I think.
Good.
But yes, you were correct. You didn't think it was just kittens?
No. I did for like a half second, and then I was like, no, that's Mew.
It's funny, like how those little bits of context and suddenly just be like, okay, now I know where this is from.
Yeah, well, and it's just that little bit of my brain grappling with, I know this is like from my childhood. I know this is nostalgia. And actually, that's a game that I should also play. Again, Pokemon Snap. We talked about the Wii U a while back, but I wish that they'd have brought Pokemon Snap to the Wii U, or heck, even to the 3DS, using the like controls. Like you could use the Wii U gamepad as the camera and
that would be
move
so cool.
around and stuff. Like with Nintendo's love for motion controls, I'm surprised they didn't do something like that. But it's cool. It's definitely a unique game in terms of like Pokemon. I guess they have Pokemon Go now for quote unquote Pokemon Snap.
Yeah, I just thought of it because, I think it was one of the first games I played with you on your N64.
Oh, really?
When we like first started hanging out. Yeah. So I was just thinking about it in the nostalgia sense.
Wow. You have a good memory.
But I think it was one of the first games that we played together.
Yeah, I don't remember that, honestly. Like,
well, you suck.
I mean, I remember playing Pokemon Snap with you or like together, but I don't remember that like being early on in our friendship or like awareness of each other. That's pretty cool. So we have strong connections to Pokemon Snap. Well, then that means I have to play it again so how long have we known each other then? Is it like 17 years?
16?
16?
I think I was 8 and I'm 24 now. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Dang. That's a long time.
Our friendship as a teenager.
Did we already have this discussion?
I think so, yeah.
I think we did, because we were like, yeah, all right. It might not have been on the podcast, but we definitely had the discussion about our friendship being a teenager. Oh, man. That's great. I don't know how I feel about it, actually. On the one hand, good for it, it's growing up. But on the other hand, it's a junior in high school.
Yeah, it's an awkward time to be alive.
It is. But I mean, at least it doesn't have any student loan debt yet.
Yeah, well, that's definitely, I think, any time that you don't have student loan debt is a very good thing.
America.
Cries.
Oh, well.
Cries. Pitiful sadness, tears of sadness.
Sadness, tears of sadness, as opposed to those other tears of
+1 anger. Sadness, tears of sadness.
Just the more strength added to your weaponry of crocodile tears. Well, I think that with the close of our mystery sound segment, which I always love, honestly, like I love ending the podcast with that. It's just
so much fun to
it is.
Be stumped by you.
Yeah, it's
vice versa.
Yeah, because in it's you get the nostalgia tropes with it, and just like it makes you notice things in games that you may have forgotten or not been as aware of, and it's fun. I like trying to guess. I'm totally content being stumped, but I will point out that I did win this episode.
You definitely won this episode.
Yeah, but I definitely lost last episode.
In the first inaugural soundboard mystery sound segment.
Oh, I suppose so. I was the winner. We don't have like a victory noise.
That's charge. I don't know. I guess you're charging ahead to victory.
How about this? I think this is something that will be very good going forward. Whoever wins, quote unquote, wins, the other person has to do their victory noise. So you gave me the inaugural victory noise, which was the beautiful charge face trumpet that you just played. And
face trumpet.
We'll just go forward from there. That sounds like fun.
Yes.
Splendid.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please check out our Twitter at tuneintogaming.
Yeah. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at tuneintogaming@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at tuneintogaming. We are now officially on iTunes. Our podcast is on iTunes. So that means you can comment on iTunes and rate us on iTunes, which is also really great. And you can subscribe to us on iTunes, which means every 2 Mondays, 2 weeks, every other Monday when our podcast comes out. That's right. Right? Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that. When our podcast comes out, you'll get it. Yeah, it'll be there in the internet.
Immediately as soon as it's actually ready.
Yeah. It's more immediately available to you than you having to actually go out and find it yourself. And because clearly everyone loves using iTunes, it's the thing. Just do it.
The go-to.
The go-to.
Is a celebratory tweet called a twoot? Like woot, but twoot?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. I accept. I accept that. So a twoot is when you have won. So therefore I should tweet.
You should tweet about it.
I should tweet about it.
When you win.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, that's it for us this episode. It's been great. Again, feel free to get in contact with us, bug us. We'll be around. We'll be streaming on our respective Twitch channels. Me at North Kozar.
Will be a babbling brook of gaming content.
Yeah, and then this other voice over here who apparently can't recognize his own voice in sound effects, Quactical on Twitch and on Twitter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it for us on this episode.
Alrighty.
We'll catch you next time.
Tune out.
Meow.